Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I'm excited, surprised, whatever to say that the great print revival is happening, and I'm happy to be featured in my favorite Back from the Dead publication, Bomb Snow. Todd Heath and the gang are back at Bomb Snow, and you can see a little write-up on the Powell movement in the magazine, and you can purchase your copy of this fun little title over at bombsnow.com. And I'm not the only one who got a write-up. Bomb Snow got a little press of their own over on TetonGravity.com. And while Bomb Snow is leading a print revival, TGR has been at the forefront of the digital revolution forever. They're the number one source of snow media out there, in my opinion. And the reason they crush it is because they've always been about the community first. For them, through their content and their forums, they've created a hub that people spend hours at. And now, that hub is about to get a lot bigger. The crew at TGR sent me over an entry to their new subscription service, TGR Premium, and I've been using it. You get all the TGR movies, big discounts on TGR and the Dead gear and all the TGR gear really, plus access to Proform pricing from a lot of brands. This is a $50 subscription that I'll use for the content, but I might even take advantage of some of the deals. It's so much better than having to ask for a code. So this one is going to pay for itself and I'm psyched. My first use of the platform was watching old segments of my legendary guests this week. I'm talking about one of the pioneers of big mountain skiing and the first skier to be documented grabbing his skis, Kent Kreitler. But before we start talking to Kent, I want to ask you to do a few things for me. The first is subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to it. Second, please tell some friends about the show. Third, follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. And finally, please support my great sponsors who make this show happen. They are Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Elon Skis. Now, let's talk to Kent Kreitler. We did a podcast years ago, like 5 years ago, and you brought it up the other day when we were talking that Michelle Parker had come in and done inappropriate questions on that podcast. You are a yogi, and she wanted to see what positions you could get your body into.
I don't remember that. I thought she was like burning me for, I can't remember.
She might have burned you on one question, but one question was to see how flexible you were. And she wanted to see if you could get into that position that every man has probably thought of, but no one can actually do. And you actually tried to do it on the podcast. You were getting into the position you could hear.
No, I wasn't.
Oh, I'm going to play the audio on here. You definitely were. You said that you could get yourself to where it was in a microphone, like a microphone's distance away. Are you as flexible as you used to be?
That's a funny question. I've never been very flexible. I've always been pretty tight because I'm a skier and a male athlete. I do yoga because it keeps me moderately flexible and loosens me up. But I think most people who ski all the time just are pretty tight.
Yeah, no, I'm very tight as well. I just thought with that whole yogi thing, her question was perfect. And I'm going to play that audio into here, and you're going to laugh when you think back to it. And Michelle, I think we should go with question number 3. And please try to raise your level of inappropriateness. Or if I need to, I will jump in.
Yeah, I need you to jump in.
All right, so I guess this is almost like a yes or no question, but something that I'm sure a lot of men have been wondering for a lot of years. So Kent is a yogi, so he's very flexible, and he's able to get his body in positions that other people aren't able to get their bodies in. Is there anything special that Kent can do to himself based on his flexibility that only other men have dreamed of?
Yes, I like this one.
So the question is, you are a yogi. You are able to get in many different positions. You are more flexible than most people out there. Marilyn Manson once had 2 ribs removed, so he could do this. We were wondering if you are able to do anything to your body that most other men can't, although everyone's thought about.
That's pretty classic. I wish.
We know you've tried.
God, I wish I could. My answer on that is I wish I was more flexible than I am. Like yoga's been awesome. The physical side of yoga has been great for recovering and getting close to 50 and still feeling really good. But I feel like a lot of us skiers, our bodies are so entrained to be so tight, like with like the lifetime of rigidity that you get through years of skiing. I don't know how many people really get to the level of flexibility of Dharma Mitra or someone like that, or Marilyn Manson.
So how close can you get? Can you kind of get your head there like it's a microphone?
Hold on, I'm gonna see.
All right, this is what video Skype's all about. This is so weird to watch, Kent.
Go with the microphone.
All right, well, I love that you gave it the old try.
No, the thing is like, oh, never mind.
No, go ahead. The thing is,
I'm not gonna go there. I'm just not gonna go there.
we don't need to start with you sucking your own and I'll probably bleep that out. But we will start with you being born in Kansas City and then moving to New Jersey. You lived in Jersey till you were like 10. And if you would have stayed in New Jersey, do you ever think, like, with the look that I have, I could have run the Jersey Shore?
You?
No, you.
The Jersey Shore. I don't know. It's funny. Like, when we lived in New Jersey, I was just fanatical about skiing when I was really young. And we went to Vernon Valley and Great Gorge. But, you know, I probably wouldn't have had the opportunity to grow up on the Sun Valley ski team and skiing every day and end up being a pro skier. But I don't know. My character is such that we didn't live very close to the Jersey Shore. So, who knows? I don't know.
But with that, you got into skiing in Jersey, which is crazy because eventually you moved to a great ski area. But New Jersey is not known for its amazing ski slopes and programs and developing kids. So were you like a weekend warrior? Did you just go a couple times a winter? How did that happen? Because you were in Jersey till you were like 10.
We just went a couple times a winter. One memory I have is that the junior high kids, my sister was in 7th grade, and they did a school trip. And for some reason, I was only in, 4th grade, and they let me go with all the older kids on this ski trip in this bus. And that was kind of crazy. But one other memory is that we were pretty well off, but my parents always kind of gave me hand-me-downs and always made us work for stuff as kids. And I remember I had this pair of skis that was a pretty fresh pair of Rossignol hand-me-downs for my sister. I remember the first day I was skiing on them, I skied right into a lift line and my ski broke in half on someone's ski boot. But yeah, anyway, I don't have too many memories about skiing back then. I just knew as soon as I started, I was collecting ski posters and just thought it was the thing to be doing.
Yeah, were there any team sports for a young Ken Kreitler in Jersey, or was it all like posters of skiers on your wall and that's what you were all about?
Yeah, I did all the things that kids do at that age. I played t-ball, I think. And then I always played soccer all the way through high school and track and field. I was always a pretty good little athlete. I had a whole bunch of ribbons and things from track and field.
And by the time you get to be about 10, your folks realize they need a lifestyle change and they're going to move out to Haley, Idaho. How the hell do you pick Haley, Idaho from New Jersey?
That's a good question that you'd have to ask them for sure. But I know that they just wanted to make a big change. And now you see tons of it, especially since COVID. But back then it was harder to find work in a ski area. And my dad was a Wall Street guy. And back then it was pre-internet. So I remember we moved here and then he had his own little office and just did his own trading on the phone. And then he ended up opening a business. And back then I remember they had this whole room. It was this whole big closet that was dedicated to wiring the New York Stock Exchange as rapidly as possible into a little office in Idaho. He was actually kind of a pioneer in that area in terms of someone starting a fund in a remote little area.
And for you, being a 10-year-old, you've got friends and everything in Jersey and you're packing up and moving. Are you bummed to be leaving? Or are you super stoked to be in bigger mountains because you're a skier at heart who just doesn't have the mountains near you?
I was a pretty shy kid, and I remember being tentative about leaving all my friends. That's always kind of scary as a kid, but overall, I adapted really quickly and made friends here really quickly, some of whom I'm still friends with. And yeah, it was a pretty smooth transition. I think that first summer was a little lonely, not knowing any other kids being here. I say here, I left for 20 years and lived in Squaw and then some other places, but back here now.
That first summer where you say it's a little bit tough, is that the summer where you go on a rafting trip and you get to meet Lane Parish, that first summer out in Sun Valley?
Yep. Yeah, and he was a fantastic skier. He's kind of little known, but he was pretty amazing. I mean, if you watch those early Barrymore films, just ripping bump skier and then throwing double backflips and super amazing skier. He died in a fixed wing, kind of one of those fixed wing with the fan motor paraglider things.
Oh, yeah.
crashed into a river, and then he couldn't get out of his seatbelt and he drowned.
You're pretty young when that happens, and he's like an influential dude, I would think, in your life, just being the first like badass that you meet in Sun Valley when you move out that way. Is that something that really is heavy for a young kid, losing a hero like that?
I don't know. For kids, I don't remember it being that heavy. Yeah, I don't know. To be just honestly, I don't know if death registers with as much grief as it does for children as it does for adults if it's not a family member.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, and in your life and times, you've seen so many people pass that have been good friends of yours, so you can kind of measure it as in like losing Lane when I was 11 or 12. How is that different than McConkey when I'm 30 or however old you are? And yeah, it's totally different, I would think, where one is you never get that piece back, and Lane, like, you knew here and there and he was like a hero, but at the same time, it's not like he's a best friend.
Exactly.
So how long until you join the Haley race team? Because I'm sure when you get out there, life becomes all about skiing and you're able to do skiing almost daily. And is it joining the race team right away?
The first year I wasn't on the team and I just free skied. And then the second year I was on the Row to Run ski team, I think. I know, maybe I was both. Yeah, so I was on the Row to Run ski team for 2 years, and then I switched to the Sun Valley ski team. And now the Sun Valley ski team kind of runs the hill at Row to Run, and they do a ton of training down there and have a great program that they run down south. It's a little mountain with a pommel lift, but it's a great place for the kids to train and get away from the big mountain and kind of keeps the kids spread out. The program here is huge now, so they're trying to run a lot of kids on the hill, and I think Sun Valley likes it that they use that hill down in Haley because it keeps some of the traffic off the mountain.
Yeah. And being that you're a late starter when it comes to racing, because a lot of kids who grow up in the Sun Valley area, they're in race programs when they're like 7, 8 years old. You don't get into one until you're like 11 or 12. And I talked to Reggie Christ about this because he moved to Sun Valley when he was like 11 as well. And it definitely put him a little behind the rest of the pack. Did you find that as well in terms of technique? Is like it was a little bit harder for you to catch up to where everybody else was?
Yeah, I guess so at first. But it's all pretty fun at that age.
Yeah, and it gets more serious as you get a little bit older. But first, your parents end up splitting up, which is a buzzkill. And does that really impact you, or is it something you can handle based on your age at that point?
Yeah, I was 14. It was manageable. It was manageable. That was a good thing. I mean, I don't know. My parents were so at each other. I was kind of happy when they split up.
Yeah, it was just relief. No fighting at home.
A lot more peace around each home.
Yep. So when that happens, I think that's right around the time you move to Ketchum for middle school, and you end up at the community school, which is the private school there. And it's the home of Peekaboo Street, the Chris brothers. There's so many heavy hitters there. And it's an expensive place, but it sounds like with Wall Street and what your dad was doing, that didn't really matter, the cost of the community school?
Well, the community school now costs about, I don't even know, but I think it's like $30,000 a year. Back when we went, it was like 10. The cool thing about the community school is it has these outdoor programs that are really motivating and some cool travel programs. You do a snow camping trip at one class, and you do a desert trip to like the Moab area in another year. So each class does these trips, and then there's a spring out. So I think like a lot of the kids who come out of that school get like a real good taste of what's out in the world and end up pretty adventurous. Peekaboo actually went to the public school and wasn't in our school, but we were all in the ski team together. And back then we all interacted. My sister went to the public school and she was kind of having too much fun. So my parents sent me to the private school because they didn't think the public school was serious enough. Plus it was better for skiing. It's up in Ketchum. But the climate in Ketchum's changed so much because back then, we were kind of an anomaly with what my dad did, but now you have so many heavy hitters that have moved to these ski areas because people can work from home. And then since COVID, it's all of a sudden like, I don't know, it's up by 25 or 30% more of just these uber wealthy city people who move here, which is from what I hear, and I don't have a child in the community school and maybe mine will go there, but I hear there's a lot more demand on the academic side than there used to be. And it was always a great school and it was really academically demanding, which I appreciate. But yeah, I don't know that much about it now. I know it's a great school. I hope I can afford to put my daughter in there.
Yeah, I think when rich people have the money to put their kids in there, it better be a great school because that's what they're paying for. But a guy who wasn't rich, who might not have been involved with the school, but was involved within your life, was one of your coaches, Pat Bauman. He was one of the original K2 performers. And were you aware of all the ski history that went with Sun Valley when you moved out there?
In a way, I mean, as a kid, you're just part of that culture. And Sun Valley always produced some really great athletes. We've even had Olympic marathon runners who've trained here and lived here. And I know the Nordic program's really good. So, yeah, I mean, growing up and having Warren Miller be from here and do his first movie of the year here and commentate it live at the premiere showing. And the same with Barrymore, you know, at that point, you grow up in that culture. And I think it puts you in a frame of mind that you can do that. So for me, growing up around Bobby Burns and Bauman and Lane Parish and Kristen Cooper was here at that time and came out of here, and some good racers, you just kind of have this vision like you're kind of part of a community of people who are really successful athletes. It makes you feel naturally like you could do that for me.
And are you going to all these premieres, watching them narrated, and then seeing the Barrymore stuff almost happen in real time? Are you seeing the shoots actually happen in your backyard?
I saw a little bit of that going on. And then like Joey Cordo was here too. And he was a great bump skier. And when I was in high school, I started doing photo shoots as a model for David Steckline. And back then the photographers held all the weight in the ski industry, and they would just get all the clothes and all the product and everything else. And then they would find the athletes to go out and be, you know, kind of like the posers for the photos. But I started working in front of cameras when I was like 17 or 6. Well, as young as 14, really.
And that was huge for you, too, because you also met some industry folks through that. That's where you end up with connections through Volant as well, and you get some Volant skis to ski on in Sun Valley. And it's kind of the end of your race career and the beginning of a new era. I would say your mogul career, but there is no mogul program in Sun Valley. But you come up racing, and you're in one of the most competitive divisions in the country, the Intermountain Division. It's like Sun Valley, Jackson Hole, Utah, all those crews. And was Nobis the dude to beat in racing back then?
Nobis was pretty good. The Park City team was super strong back then. There was also a ski academy called Romark in Salt Lake that produced a bunch of really great athletes. But yeah, I raced against Tommy, Mo, and Nobis, and I went to the Junior Olympics every year and raced against some of those guys. And so yeah, but Nobis was like a regular fixture in my ski racing program. And then that senior year in high school, I actually quit racing, and then I did 2 fun events that year. I did the Jimmy Huga, which we won in Sun Valley. My team won, me and 2 gals. You had to have a co-ed team. And then we got to go to Vail to the finals. And I remember tucking, you know, you try to see how many laps you can do in whatever amount of hours it is. And I remember I was doing tucking laps with Steve McKinney, which was awesome experience in high school. And then also I did this thing called the Hardcore Skier Challenge. And I drove down to Vail. And it was this event where you raced and then went through some obstacles. And then you ended up on Lukma or something. It's like that mogul run.
Yep.
And then you'd rip down that mogul run. And I won that event. And I won all this stuff, you know, skis, a pole, I don't know, all this gear. I thought that was great. I kind of got this through in mind, like, okay, the USSA going for a trophy thing isn't quite as fun as going somewhere and winning a whole bunch of gear and the rest of it. And then I was always like what I became. I was real versatile. I podiumed once in a while in ski racing. I was usually in the top 10, but I wasn't like just a regular podium athlete. And I didn't like racing very much. Like training, being on ski team was super fun, but I was really nerve-wracked at races. And I didn't like standing around the start and having to wait for my start time. I always, honestly, just always really wanted to ski. And for me, that kind of filtered into the big mountain skiing too. Like I never really enjoyed competing that much and doing those big mountain comps, but it was a way to get noticed back then. And it was where our whole group of all my peers got together and competed. And it was the foundation for free skiing in the sport. So I did those events for a while. But then when I graduated from there and I could just film and just go hit big lines and be innovative and do things that were unique and new and exploratory, that transition is what I really loved, which is kind of what I went through in high school by ditching ski racing and getting to those other just more fun events.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break, and I love the fact that I've been working with the 10 Barrel Brewery for over 4 years. While there are a lot of copycat breweries out there, 10 Barrel has supported ski, snowboard, and bike since they started in Bend back in 2006. And since then, they have not only been brewing the tastiest beers to come out of the Northwest, Profuse Juice being my favorite, but they've supported so much in action sports. Protect Our Winners, the Surfrider Foundation, and so many other rad properties and events, along with an all-time team of athletes. 10 Barrel supports EJack, Lucas Walks, Curtis Cizik, Carson Storch, Ben Ferguson, Brittany White, and brand new to the team is a Powell Movement alum, Kate Zelef. 10 Barrel really puts their money where their mouth is, and they do things the right way. So support the beer that supports what you do. You can find out more about the athletes, the events, and everything 10 Barrel over at 10barrel.com. My final sponsor this round is one of my favorites, Stanley. And we may as well start their ad with the most important part. I'm going to save you 30% on all Stanley products. This is an amazing deal that can be unlocked with the code DRINKFAST. That's all one word and lowercase. And you use it when you check out at stanley1913.com. And if you spend over $200 with that code DRINKFAST, Stanley will also ship you a Powell Movement beanie with your order. It's a limited edition beanie, and Stanley's an amazing brand that I hope you know about. They're the ones that invented the category of keeping things hot and cold back in 1913. Think about that green bottle that used to keep your grandpa's coffee hot. That's the Stanley I'm talking about. They make all the things that you're going to need for your parking lot lunch sessions at the ski hill and your summer camping and RVing adventures. So head on over to stanley1913.com for that deal. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. You know, you say that when you get into the start gate, pressure comes on and maybe you don't produce your best run. That carries off into the big mountain contests, although you do well in those. When you're filming and there isn't that pressure of a contest run, but there is pressure to produce, I would think. Do you still get some of those nerves or any of that fear or anything that happens up top? Or is it a totally different experience than a contest?
No, it feels like every run feels a little bit like a contest. But I enjoyed performing for cameras because, yeah, it's just more under your own terms. You're deciding when you're dropping in and the rest of it. It's just the whole contest atmosphere it's intense. I mean, some people are really built for it. Shane McConkey really loved to compete. He loved it. And I didn't love it so much, but there were good experiences. And the other thing is doing the contest, the line selection and the scoping a line, a contest line, and trying to be original, like doing that for several years before and during the filming really cultivates your ability to choose aggressive line selection when you're filming. I think you can have a tendency filming to be lazy about your line selection, but if you have a competitive background, you're used to trying to pick out the hardest line that you can do on the hill. And so I think for people who film, like having that competition experience and carryover is important because it really gets you in that frame of mind of like, okay, if everyone else was here against me, what line would I choose versus maybe being a little bit lazier about it.
When you say lazier, I mean, there's some guys who look at it that they want to do a creative line. They want to pick a line that no one else is going to pick, and maybe the degree of gnarly isn't as big as someone else's line, but it's going to look pretty creative. But you were always looking for that gnarly line that was going to drop people's jaws, it seemed like.
Yeah, well, we were the gnarly line generation, and it was before the tricks came into play so much. As you know, I was part of the innovation towards doing tricks in big mountain terrain.
Yep.
But when I was doing the competitions, tricks, they weren't a judged factor. They weren't really, like Seb Michaud was the first guy, French guy, throwing he threw some big backflips in competitions. And back then you weren't really getting extra credit for throwing tricks. There wasn't a category, or it may be up to your degree of difficulty was one of the factors. And so it would factor into that. I don't even know how they do it now, but now you have to throw some tricks in your line. Whereas back then it was like ski the burliest line you can fluidly and beautifully.
Do it with speed and people are like, all right, that guy wins.
Yeah. And then some people chose more technical. And then, the guys who really excelled mixed it up between technical and high speed and just mixing up a great line and being fluid with it.
But before we even get to these contests, the next big step in your life is going to be going to college, and it's going to be Boulder. You're going to go to University of Colorado. And I don't think there are plans of like, hey, I'm going to be a pro skier or anything like that. It's, hey, I'm going to go to college and it's going to be awesome. I'm going to do it in Colorado and I'm going to ski a shit ton. Is that kind of what you're thinking? Like, what do you want to do with your life when you head to school? Do you have any clue?
Well, I studied film in school and photography, which I loved, but I didn't know what I was going to do. And then that first year in college was when that Volant connection had happened. the year that I was a senior in high school, and I broke Volant skis. And then the guys from Volant, Hank Cashua, and this other guy, Tim Patterson, knew I was in Boulder, and they were like, let's get this guy out on some skis who's skiing them really hard. And they were still kind of in an R&D phase and launching their first retail year. So they got me out, and they needed photos. So they were next door to Spider, and they were like, hey, go out with these Spider guys and shoot some photos. So that connected me into Spider and Nick Nixon. And so that was like my freshman year in college. And that was just a handful of weekends throughout the year. And then Shane and I moved in together our sophomore year with Jaquet, who started Freeze.
How does that happen? Because you know Jaquet from Sun Valley, and you know DJ Hodge from Sun Valley, but I don't know if you know McConkey. How do you guys all connect before you move in together?
Shane was on the ski team, and we had a mutual friend from Sun Valley, Laura Flood, who connected us because we needed another housemate. And Laura told Shane to go talk to us, and he needed a place to live. We didn't know Shane our freshman year, but the summer of our sophomore year is when we all moved into that house up on 10th and Penn in Boulder. So then Shane was with us, and that was our sophomore year. And then Shane, I can't remember what year he did the mogul tour, but he was doing the mogul tour, and I guess that might have been our junior year. I can't remember, but first year of the UX Extreme Skiing Championships, we used to make fun of it. We used to always make fun of like, oh, extreme skiing, and it kind of carried over, and Shane did some skits on it, some things, but we thought it was kind of goofy. And then I went off and won the US Extremes, and Shane started doing the mogul tour. And then that first event I went and did it, which was the second one. Dean Conway won the first one. And that was when I went and met Coombs was in the competition. Seth was in the competition, Swanwick. Kristen Ulmer was already a good friend of mine for some reason. I can't remember how Kristen and I connected, but she was there and she was judging.
Dean Cummings had a killer run.
Yeah, so Dean was there, and I think Dean ended up second. That year I won, and they gave you a free trip to Alaska, but I still wasn't really taking the competition thing very seriously. And I was already planning to go to Europe to shoot Nick Nixon's first ski movie, who was the guy who was shooting for Spider. And so I gave my plane ticket to Alaska to Cummings. Yeah, I gave my ticket to the Worlds to him and didn't even go the first year.
Which is crazy, and I'm going to come back to this, but I think before is when you go to South America for the first time with Volant and Spider. Is that correct?
Yeah, that might have been that summer after my freshman year of college.
Yep.
I went to Las Leñas with Hank Cashua because he was commentating. They did a summer race down there. It was like the American, I don't know what it was, but they did a race down there. And so a bunch of the U.S. team guys were there. I think Reggie was there and Tommy was there. And then it dumped the whole time. So my job was to break skis, and it dumped the whole time. And I had very little avalanche knowledge back then. And they didn't really have that hill very secured back then. And I was lucky in a way because I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was skiing off the top of Marte and everything and just ski. I was by myself. And back then, you just do laps and laps, and your lines would be the only ones on the hill. And I was doing laps off the top and exploring all that stuff down there and just skiing POW for a week, and didn't have much luck breaking any skis. But I remember Tommy was there. So the guys who were like, I grew up, in Squaw, I was with Rolves, and I was with Tommy, and Rolves was always in the park doing rails with us. And I remember like down in South America, there was this jump, and Tommy was throwing backflips off this jump. And, I just see the guys who really excelled in racing, in my opinion, were these guys who just love skiing too, and were pretty diverse as well. But anyway, yeah, so South America, that was my first trip down there, and that was fun. And then we ended up going back, and they started the South American Extremes the next year, I think. And that was a pretty fun pilgrimage for a couple years.
And is that South America trip like the first big trip where you realize like, holy shit, I might be able to do something with this whole ski career? Like when you're in school your freshman year and you're getting free skis, that's one thing. But when people send you to South America, pay for all your expenses, and then start putting you in the magazines, is that when you realize there might be a future for me here?
Yeah, a little bit. There wasn't a model in place except for Schmidt and Plake and Trevor and Eric. Trevor Peterson and Eric Pahota were cracking it.
Yep.
But there wasn't a great model in place for being a professional. Now it's free skiing. Back then it was extreme skiing. But yeah, back then I started thinking I could do that and make a living at it somehow. It's not so much make a living as back then. You're not really thinking about the money or anything, but you want to do the trips, and then, you're attracted to the fame and the rest of it, and looking up to those guys. If you can live a life like them, it looks pretty glamorous.
Totally. So you get back from South America, you get into school, and this is around the time that you hook up with Nick Nixon, and you film 2 films with him. McConkey was in those movies as well. I think it was Ski Theater and Alpine Rapture. And there was a falling out with Nick at some point, and something happened with Shane where he pissed him off or did something, and I could never find the story, but what was the falling out with Nick Nixon?
Are you serious? You can't find the story? Or you're just trying to get me to tell you?
I'm trying to get you to tell me the story.
There wasn't really like a huge falling out with Nick. Nick was very race focused, so his movies were interesting because he was sort of getting it a little bit on the stump thing. And he saw that Greg had success and he'd seen the war, we'd all been seeing Warren Miller and Barrymore, but Nick kind of had this race thing he'd do in his movies too. And I don't know, it didn't seem like Nick was headed quite in the same direction, but you never know at that age. But anyway, with Nick, there wasn't necessarily falling out, except that he just stopped making ski movies after the second one, but we played a prank on him. And I don't think it was a huge falling out. He just didn't make a movie next year, but we played a prank on him where we put like condoms in his bag before he went home. And his wife opened up his bag, and we were traveling in Europe, and back then it was before cell phones, so you couldn't get a hold of anyone right away. But Nick went home and he got in huge trouble for condoms that we'd planted in his luggage.
That's just ridiculous.
The thing is that those guys were always playing there were a lot of pranks going on, and I guess that still happens, but that was like payback, but it was I guess we ended up winning on the pranks.
I would think that anybody who gets in a game of pranks with McConkey loses.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you're lucky to be on McConkey's team in that respect because you're always going to be on the winning side.
No, well, he made fun of me plenty too, but that's just how Shane was.
Yeah. So circling back to the biggest moment of your career at this point, it's the U.S. Extremes, and you're really, really tight with Shane at this point. He's on the Mogul Tour, and you guys are making fun of the Extremes, but why doesn't he come down to even experience it with you? Does he have another event, or is it just something that you're like, I'm doing this, and he laughs at it and you go?
No, I mean, we thought it was kind of cool afterwards, and I told him how much fun it was. And we went the next year, and he might have won the next year. I can't remember what happened in 94. And like, I remember the next year we went together, and one of the things we did is after the event, after the finalists went, we went first on one of the runs, and then we tied goggle bags around our units and we skied the course basically naked, but we had we had a goggle bag around us and we skied down naked at the end together.
That's a very Shane thing to do. Now, a lot of these things I'm guessing are Shane's idea that you're just going along with.
I don't know. It was pretty cooperative at times back then. And then, that was probably his idea.
But the first year you go there, you've got all the people that you're talking about, Dean Cummings, Seth Morrison, Swanee. There's so many people that are there. It's a pre-internet era. And are you aware of how well these guys are skiing and how gnarly these guys are? Or is it something that you figure out when you first see them ski? Yeah,
I didn't really know what anyone else was doing. And I knew a little bit about Doug. And there are other people who I was introduced to. I remember like Jimmy Zell did these really cool creative lines. He didn't win, but Jimmy Zell would just pick these crazy, really unique lines that when he was competing. And didn't know Seth at all. Seth obviously charges, and that was fun meeting him. And then, a whole bunch of other guys too.
And he was just a kid. I mean, you were like almost an adult. You were probably like early 20s, but he was what, like 18, 19, something like that?
Yeah, he's just a couple years younger, but not too much.
Yeah, I guess it just always seemed like he came up a little bit younger for some reason. I don't know why. But with that contest, who do you connect with right away? Like, whose numbers do you get when you leave the Extremes? Like, who are you going to keep in touch with the next year?
Doug, Dean. I mean, kind of everyone. You kind of stay in touch with everyone. And then Shane and I, or me, I mean, I'd bounce around after that when I could. And I remember going out to Jackson and calling up Doug and asking Doug to go skiing. And I remember skiing all over with Doug. And I remember ducking all these ropes, ducking into Corbett's, which was closed, ducking into No Name, which was closed, ducking into this other stuff that's closed. And Doug was like, "Don't worry, you're with me." I was like, "Should we be doing this?" And Doug's like, "Don't, it doesn't matter. You're with me. We're good." And then he ended up getting kicked off the hill the next year or something like that.
Yeah, he like moved because of that.
Yeah, he got booted off of Jackson. And started basing out of the Grove more.
And then everything at Jackson changed after a while, right?
Changed.
They had started letting people go out.
Oh, but yeah, you used to have to sneak out of bounds at Jackson too. When you used to have to duck under the ropes and sneak out of bounds. So yeah, you're right about that.
Yeah, and eventually that whole program changed a little bit. But after the extremes is when you decide to go all in, and I don't know if it's right then when you drop out of school, but you eventually drop out of school and go all in on skiing. And is there any fallout from this decision with like your family or anything else about what you're deciding to do with your life?
I mean, there was, yeah. They always wanted me to finish school.
And you were so close.
But I just asserted my independence pretty heavily and decided that that's what I wanted to do. And kind of always told them I'd go back and finish school, which I kind of thought I would for a while.
Well, you could still always do it. You could be 80 and finish school. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. I've done other schools now, so I don't know about the college degree.
So school is a thing of the past, and the extremes are in Crested Butte. And when you were there, is that when you meet the guys at Matchstick? Because they're based out of Crested Butte as well. And they're going to start something right about then. Is that when you meet them?
Yeah, I mean, Steve had started shooting and I think made his first film. And then Shane and I tried to do an Alaska shoot with Stump. It just didn't go very well. There were a couple shots that made the movie. Maybe it was P-Tex, Lies, and Duct Tape. I can't remember. But, you would just kind of reach out. I would just reach out to people and ask them if I could shoot with them.
I would think being able to shoot with Stump would be a dream come true because we've talked about Barrymore and everything. But eventually, with the stuff that you're watching, I would think everything changes into Stump's movies and Schmidt and Plake and Hattrip and what they're doing. And that's what you guys want to be doing, I would think.
Yeah, I think the thing that started with Steve was like, I went to Sham and hooked up with Micah Black. And I pitched to Steve that Gary Bingham shoot a segment. So Gary Bingham went out and shot on his little wind-up 16 millimeter, whatever, Bolex. And Micah and I shot the segment for Steve. That was when I was with Obermeyer, so it was pretty early.
Is that like The Tribe?
No, it was before that.
Wow, okay.
I think, or no, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, Micah and I went out and shot with Bingham and put together a Chamonix segment.
And is it different when you're used to going out with Shane and having Shane push you to ski, and then going out and skiing with Micah? Is it a different kind of push from a different athlete when you go with him?
Kind of. I mean, I was always pretty self-motivated. And the first movie I did with Nick Nixon was without Shane, I think. No, I guess he was in it. But I did one of the shoots without him, like the Europe trip. I can't remember. But anyway, we're all kind of having fun and also competitive and also just trying to do our best on our own. It doesn't really matter what the other guy's doing. So there wasn't really an impact, to be honest, for me. It never really mattered who I was with. I always kind of knew what I wanted to do.
And then one thing that separated you from most everyone early on and throughout your whole career really is that you weren't a Matchstick guy exclusively. You hooked up with TGR from the beginning, so you were in like every movie TGR put out, and you were putting out 2 movie parts every year, it seemed like, which is like 2 seasons in one compared to every other ski movie skier. Was that tough to manage in terms of both like feelings and your time?
Yeah, it was a little bit.
Because Matchstick wants to get the best footage out of you, and they want to have the best Kent Kreitler footage.
Yeah, they were competitive with each other. I just had a connection with the TGR crew, and we became really good buddies. And then we had a little bit different vision that I really appreciated, which was to do things a little bit more bigger. Steve was still kind of working under the older paradigm of how Stump mostly shot, which is more like up close and mini golf, and even smaller than mini golf. And then with Todd and Steve, our goal right off the bat was to go out and shoot bigger lines top to bottom, which really appealed to me. I just felt like that was something I wanted to do. And we talked about it, before those guys even put the film company together. We were all kind of part of putting that together, although obviously it's their business. But, we talked a lot about what we wanted to do and how we wanted to differentiate and what we thought would be more interesting for us.
To me, looking at it back then, it seemed like the Matchstick days were more maybe high production and they were making you guys out to be more rock star-like. And it was always fun to watch. But the really progressive shit was the TGR stuff where it was like Harvest and finding those big AK lines and being the first crews to really mock those. And is that kind of how you looked at it? Like different, like you were looking at it on the TGR end? Like big wave surfers looked at big waves? Like you were looking for the gnarly shit you can't find anywhere and Alaska was that special place?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I can't remember when Wake Up Call came out, but that was the first big wave film that blew everyone's minds. And we'd already started doing some big stuff, but yeah, I don't know. It's just kind of that wake up call mentality where you're just putting yourself into really extreme environments, but also just flashing lines top to bottom instead of having it be segments of lines or an air. So yeah, just a different vision of it. The wider angle shots, the whole mountain, and more about the skiing. Hard to say.
Well, Matchstick built up personalities and made you guys rock stars where it seemed like
Yeah.
TGR was more about the skiing.
Yeah, and TGR could have been better at doing that than they were.
In the beginning, especially, TGR was bigger than the athletes, where Matchstick, the athletes were bigger than Matchstick almost.
Yeah, they did a good job. Yeah, I mean, Matchstick's movies, I still love. TGR and Matchstick are still making amazing films.
For sure.
And they've become a lot more similar to each other.
My next sponsor break starts with Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. And for over 60 years, Peter Glenn has been getting people out there. And this week, they're going to protect your eyes along the way. That's right. Peter Glenn is giving away 2 pair of Smith Emerge sunglasses. And you can head out there rocking their ChromaPop polarized lenses that cut glare and enhance color and contrast. To enter this one, head on over to Peter Glenn's Instagram and follow both Peter Glenn and Smith. From there, like the Smith giveaway post and tag 2 friends in the comments and you're in. If you don't win, you can always get the best prices on everything Smith and countless other brands over at peterglenn.com. My final sponsor is Elan Skis, and they have been building a cult following in the States for a few years now. Why? Because their skis are better than everyone else's. And believe me, I worked at a ski manufacturer for 16 years. I know what a quality product looks like when it comes out of the factory, and you aren't going to get any better quality than you're going to find with your Elan skis. And that's just the craftsmanship. They ski even better. They're rock solid underfoot at the highest of speeds, yet still lightweight, and there's no chatter at all. And in just a few months, I can feel my skiing getting better. And that's no joke. You will feel the same thing. To find out more about all things Elan, head on over to elanskis.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Over time, it's kind of funny to look at the big movie crews back then. I mean, you had TGR, you had Matchstick, and then you had Poor Boys on the side of doing something different, but it was still a big ski movie premiere every year. And in terms of the way that those guys ran their business, it was like Matchstick was the ones that were going commercial. I don't want to say sell out, but you got to sell before you sell out. And they were selling for sure. And they were bringing in some money. TGR was like the small crew that really wasn't generating the dollars that Matchstick was generating, it seemed like back then. And you look at everything now and it's like the tables have reversed almost. Like TGR is at least at the same level, if not bigger than what Matchstick has done. And it's a tribute to just all the different tentacles of their businesses, what they're doing right now.
Yeah, TGR has become quite a force in the action sports world. And yeah, it's really impressive what they've done. And Todd and Steve really haven't changed that much. They somehow managed to run a 40-person or so group of employees. And from what I understand, I mean, they have a lot of people who weren't able to maintain independence, like the Hatchets, who made the best snowboard movies for years, are working for TGR now.
You know, they figured it out. They're smart guys. They come from great educations as well. And you can't not think about that when you factor in how successful they've been, because it seemed like they started as like the party crew that wanted to show the gnarliest skiing ever. And they're still the party crew that now is commercial and does everything. Like you said, they haven't really changed. They're still the same dudes who like to have a good time. It's just like they keep getting more professional as the years go on and getting bigger.
They still run the company on pure emotion, I think. I mean, they're good businessmen, but you know what they've been able to do is they've reached out in the Jackson community and they've gotten support from people who really know how to run businesses. So as, you know, those guys, as the CEOs of the company, they've done the right hiring, and there's so much behind them in the Jackson community in terms of people who want to be involved with TGR. And they've brought in these big money guys who showed them how to run their business. And they've had the resources to kind of be the figureheads of this team. That's honestly like a lot of the professionalism comes from people that they've hired. I mean, Steve and Todd are like the cultivators of Stoke.
Yep.
And that's kind of still how they are. They're just amazing. People just like to be around them. They create the energy and they just keep everyone excited, and they've created an animal with TGR.
Yep. You've had so many amazing parts, whether it's Harvest, Uprising Further, Mind the Addiction, The Prophecy, all the MSP stuff in the late 90s. You cranked out so much content. But I guess in terms of just the time that you're able to spend with each movie production company, does it get to be where there's headaches, where it's like Matchstick wants me here, TGR wants me here, and I can't make both people happy?
Well, I'd say one of the bigger things that happened was that the shot selection got more and more cultivated, where an A shot in 1997 versus an A shot a few years later were two different animals. And so, like, in order to put together a segment, like, you had to just be on it all year and throw down day after day just to get enough A shots to put a segment together. And I guess one of my gripes with TGR is, like you said, like, they didn't cultivate the personality as much, and they actually discarded a lot of footage and could have done a lot more character building. For a while, it really was just ski porn. Now it's changed to where they do a lot more athlete character development and let people know who the athletes are. But for a lot of those early films, like, people didn't really get to know us very much. It was really just the footage. And like you said, Matchstick was a little better at cultivating the character development and letting people know about the personalities and building the athletes. So I can't remember the question, but pretty much just got to a point where kind of had to focus on one project. That's basically what happened. And then maybe just taking the pedal off the metal a little bit too.
Was there anybody else that did what you did in filming with both companies?
No, I think I was probably the only one.
Yeah, because I mean, it's literally like Seth Morrison has a big ski season when he has a great part in whatever movie he's filming for. But for you, you have a great season when you have two great parts with whatever movies you're filming for. So every year you're having two seasons compared to everybody else's one.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I loved, like, performing and going out and shooting all the time. So it was great. I think, like, for me, it got to a point where I had to focus on one in order to put together what I wanted to put together in terms of just like one
banger part,
one banger segment. But every once in a while I did some other things. I mean, Micah and Black and I did a Warren Miller segment at Points North can't remember what year it was, but we had a killer session and skied the Sphinx and ended up getting some great shots and putting together a good Warren Miller segment. So, you know, every once in a while I do something else. And those Warren Miller shoots, you know, Warren, their whole package is different, where they do a location shoot and they focus on a location and build a location and get that location to pay money. And in a way, like, those shoots are great because you know you're going to get a segment out of it no matter what the conditions are. Now, to their demise, like I've seen, I don't know if it was 2 years ago or something, but Warren Miller gets all these locations locked in way ahead of time, rain or shine. And every once in a while they have just a really boring movie or parts of it are really boring because they have to kind of do what they agreed to do. Whereas with TGR, we'd go to places for 2 weeks and not get anything, and no one would even know we ever went there.
Right. Just burn money and come back and get nothing. And that's one thing I guess I should ask, because there's so many different ways to split this. But when you go on all these trips, there's a whole bunch of hurry up and wait. It's like you can go somewhere and have 10 days of downtime, and then on the 11th day, sun comes out, and you're expected to turn it up to 11 on your gnarly meter. How difficult is that for you to go from cold to, like, get your best line of the season, Kent?
Yeah, off the couch. No, it's tough. I mean, I think Harvest was basically, I think Alaska used to stay a little better into May, but I think Harvest was all shot in May. Like, I think we sat for like 3 weeks and like literally didn't get off the ground. And then it was like, all right, let's go. It's go time. So that Harvest is a great example of being on the couch for like a huge amount of time. And then all of a sudden, let's go out and ski the Tusk and Meteor. And like, I mean, all the stuff we ended up doing in Harvest in 3 days. It's tough. It's really difficult. I guess that's the professionalism that's part of it, is during those downtimes, it's like you're trying to find out where the local gym is and go work out every day and do things to stay healthy. And at the same time, there was always a pretty solid nightlife atmosphere going at times as well. So yeah, it's tough coming off the couch, but that's like all these movies. Like, a lot of what you see are people who haven't been on skis for a week or more.
Which is crazy. And then you've also got the trips where you get somewhere, you're ready to ski the gnarliest line of your life, and then a cloud comes in and it's going to be there for an hour and a half, and you just have to sit there, get cold and wait, and then that hole opens up and it's like, All right, Kent, we got 3 minutes and you've got to drop in. And I mean, that's just a whole nother set of nerves there, I would think, too, because even if you're not ready, you have to be ready.
Yeah, I mean, it's so much easier now. We used to have to wait for the guys to make film changes. It takes a while just to change the film, make sure all the camera guys have a reel on a 16 millimeter camera. And then we'd pull the doors off the helicopter and strap a cameraman into the helicopter. We didn't have drones, so that, that took time. So there was a lot of hurry up and wait, and that's tough. You're standing on top of a super gnarly line. Half the time you can't even really see into it. You're sitting there looking at your Polaroids back then, trying to just get clear on what your line is and waiting for things to clear up for sure. So yeah, not easy.
And we could talk about movie parts all day long. We're not going to, but one thing I want to know is you've had so many over the years. Is there a part that you think about that is the standout part when people ask you to define your career? And if you had a bunch of DVDs in front of you, you'd pick one part and be like, this is what I'm most proud of?
Well, there isn't really one, to be honest. And I'm horrible at, I don't keep track of all the films in the history very well. I know before people were doing tricks, one of the TGR films, I had like a 720 off of a cliff and a backflip with grab and some other stuff. And so like for me with Big Mountain and with tricks, like I always liked it when I knew I had something in the can that hadn't really been done before, or that was pretty original, or it was just like, I remember I won a best line thing on this Bella Coola line that was just this huge double where, you had to stick the first one and then nail the second, 60 footer after it. I don't know. So just like certain lines or tricks came in, and every once in a while for everyone, you do something that is pretty rare. And those are always the most exciting shots to put out there and it's to see like going to the public. And so I was always working on being innovative. In fact, I was doing park tricks and I was shooting park segments, and TGR wouldn't put park segments in the movie because back then they didn't think that skiers should be shooting in the park. Like I was doing Cork 720s on my 215 downhill skis in the terrain park at Squaw, and they wouldn't put them in the film. Or even when I started grabbing, I started grabbing really early. And
dude, you have the first grab that's published in 1994 in an Obermeyer ad. So the things that you were doing is way before anybody else, but it's crazy that they wouldn't show that shit that was so innovative and progressive because maybe they didn't even understand it at that point.
Back then with grabbing, the first thing that people would say was, that's just copying snowboarders. We can't put that in the movie, So I was grabbing and people just thought it was uncool, basically, to be grabbing back then. A lot of what we did as skiers who grew up, we were during this time when snowboarding was just booming. But in terms of the tricks in the park and the half pipe and the rest of it, like I shot half pipe stuff and they wouldn't put in the films and Powder wouldn't publish shots. It was just considered like it would never take hold in skiing. And it was just, that was part of snowboarding that skiers were copying. And then I've talked to older skiers in Squaw who, were skaters or whatever. And apparently not everything's on film, but I hear from old timers that some of the surf community skier guys were grabbing before we were. You don't see any of it because there aren't pictures of it, but I hear that people were doing it before snowboarding was around.
Well, you were the first documented, and I think you were talking about going on a Warren Miller trip and how those are different types of trips. And in terms of the trips that you've gone on to film, what's the most extravagant baller trip that you've ever been on? Because I think Warren Miller usually provides a lot of those. Is it a Warren Miller trip or something different?
Extravagant?
Yeah, like where you're just like, holy shit, I am not rich enough to be here.
Oh, I haven't been on that many really extravagant trips. Sometimes you get together for like a K2 meeting or a Rossignol meeting, you get hooked up with a great hotel room or something, but maybe like...
Because like the Amy Ingebrigtsens of the world who go on Warren Miller trips every year, they end up going to the most incredible resort spa type places in the world.
I know.
You didn't get any of those?
I did this Powder there was a Powder Magazine Japan, and I went on this Powder Magazine Japan trip with T.R. Youngstrom, who's the photographer who passed away in the helicopter crash that Seth was in.
Yep.
And T.R. and I went to Japan and just got super styled. We were going to these mountain huts. They're just feeding us all this sushi, and then we stayed at these hot springs. And like, I remember we flew into Tokyo, and we went out, and there was like this Chanel model who was gorgeous, who I ended up hanging out with. And then she came up to the hot springs that we were staying at. Like, that was pretty extravagant. But, most of these trips, honestly, like, they're pretty rough. Most of the heli operations, we weren't really doing the A+ ones. And then, for me, I mean, the most extravagant would just be like the extravagant skiing, like skiing Haines before anyone was there with TGR, and just being in the mountains and the terrain and the newness of it. Like, that was extravagant for me. But in terms of just, I never went on those trips.
Did you have a crazy boat trip ever with like a heli on a boat?
We did a boat thing. We did a TGR boat thing. But no, that was not extravagant. That was a pretty rinky-dink boat. The earliest Warren Miller I did was with Jim Conway. Jim Conway is like the TGR. He trains all the athletes on snow skills and avalanche safety, and he was our main guide for years. But the first Warren Miller trip, he was an athlete, and we went on this Europe trip, and it was great. We stayed in nice hotels, and I don't even remember that much from that trip. I can't tell you the movie, but we'd have to look back at it. But skiing with Conway, who back then, that was before he kind of turned into cool guy Conway. He was pretty uptight.
My last trip question, how about the gnarliest weather trip that you've been on? The one where you're out in the elements and you don't even think you're going to make it out. Have you been in one of those just miserable trips that have made you think you might not be coming home?
Honestly, the kids are a lot tougher now. They're hiking, they're camping in the backcountry. They're doing way more extreme than we were doing. We had cheap heli time, and we were riding helicopters most of the time. So we were only flying on blue, nice days. And so at least most of the time we're shacked up, not in a tent like a lot of the trips they're doing these days.
Well, you guys weren't as environmentally conscious, I would say, or just as conscious about anything as the guys are today. I mean, back then it was the Wild West, and people just wanted to get heli bumps up, and the cost as cheap as you could get would be great. We just want to get to the top and get down. And nowadays people are like, I don't know if I want to burn all that fuel. I'm going to go all human powered. And it's taken a while to get to that place. And maybe you would be in that place now if that's what your career was doing. But back then, no one wanted to see you out there camping and surviving in the elements.
Yeah, we were heli pirates and heli explorers. I mean, it was cool. We were going into new terrain all the time on helicopters. And at times, when I say heli pirates, now from what I understand, all the helicopters have GPSs and they're all tracked. Back then, they weren't tracked. And sometimes we flew into places we weren't supposed to be in.
Wild West, man.
Yeah. Yeah, it was Wild West. It goes all the way back to Chet stories, like Valdez and Chet shooting his gun out of the helicopter. I mean, I literally was with Chet when he landed and shot his gun off. Chet was the only pilot. There's all these Chet stories from the early days of Valdez that are great.
That's amazing. Well, at this point, we've just established that we're going to reconnect and we're going to go through the rest of your career because you're in your early 20s here where we're going to leave off. But I have a segment in my show, in every show, that I call Inappropriate Questions. I get someone to ask you 3 questions. They can be anything.
Okay.
This week, I got someone who's very important in the history of skiing. He helped create Freeze Magazine, which back then was a magazine that helped showcase you and all your friends and what you're doing. Today, you can get Freeze Magazine merchandise at freezemerch.com, and all the money that Mike Jaquet makes from selling these hoodies and t-shirts is going to the McConkey Foundation, Alpine Initiatives, and Protect Our Winners. So Mike Jaquet from Sun Valley, you live with him in college, and now Jaquet is going to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. Are you ready for question number 1?
This is about the worst person I can possibly think of to ask. I mean, Jaquet probably has more on me than anyone I can possibly think of, so I'm a little bit nervous.
Well, that's why I went to him, and we'll see what we got for question number 1.
All right,
inappropriate question number 1, not in any particular chronological order here. The East Coast movie tour, you had a gigantic trailer that we almost hacked in half across the state of Connecticut. But you were the only person in the history of the East Coast Movie Tour to bring a girlfriend on tour. Do you regret this decision, especially at the famous Northampton stop, which has 5 colleges within 10 square miles, 3 of them that were all female colleges?
Classic.
What were you thinking bringing a girlfriend on a ski movie tour?
Oh, she was great. I had an awesome girlfriend, Kimmy Pinkson. And she was super helpful with a lot of things.
I'm sure.
Yeah, she was great. I loved having her with me. So that's an easy question.
All right, well, he laid you up for the first one. Hopefully the second one gets a little bit more difficult. The beauty of it is that you have this week for inappropriate questions and next week, because I'm going to have to get somebody else. Who do you think would be a terrible person for me to ask to get inappropriate questions for you from?
For me, probably Kristen Ulmer.
Okay, I'm going to reach out to Kristen Ulmer to get some questions for next week, but right now I'm going to jump into question number 2.
All right.
All right, question number 2. 1992 was the first, what is referred to now as the Hill Riots. There were just recently some riots there a couple weeks ago on the corner of 10th and Pennsylvania. But back in 92, there was a certain person that started the riots on behalf of a special occasion. Do you remember what the special occasion was and who, in fact, did start the famous 1992 Hill Riot in Boulder?
Oh, that's pretty funny. This is a funny story. The special occasion was my birthday, which is April 24th, if anyone wants to send me gifts.
It's coming up.
Yeah, so the Boulder riots, there was a huge windstorm in Boulder. There was wood laying around everywhere for days and days and days. And me and Michael Jaquet and Shane and a group of our friends went and piled up all this wood that was all over the hill in the middle of the intersection of 10th and Penn. And then it came down to someone having to light the fire. And honestly, I don't remember who it was. I think it might have been Shane. It might have been me, so I don't want to completely throw Shane under the bus, but I think it was Shane.
Okay.
But anyway, so we had this huge pile of wood all piled up in the middle of 10th and Penn in Boulder. So someone lit it up, and I think we were shrooming, and we were standing on my deck. So we were all kind of standing there. We got this fire going, and then all of a sudden, like, all these people started joining in, and then couches went on and mattresses and all this shit. And then there were naked people running around the fire. Meanwhile, we're just sitting on the front porch of our house, just being like, oh my God, what we start? So then all of a sudden, I mean, it just came to where it's like a couple hundred people, and then riot police and people throwing bottles at the police and all this stuff. Anyway, it turned into this huge thing, and finally the riot police cleared everyone out. But that was the first Boulder that was the first Boulder riot, which somehow became some kind of an annual event in Boulder.
And it's all to celebrate your birthday.
Yeah, it's my birthday celebration.
That is quite amazing. We're going to go into question number 3.
All right, third and final question. And I don't even know the answer to this question, so this is for my own edification here. Kent went to community school, which was the private school. I went to Wood River, the public school. Kent's senior class, I think, had about 12 students in it, 4 or 5 of which were girls tops. I'm wondering if Kent was a high school virgin due to these very poor odds. And if he wasn't, does that mean that he stole one of our Wood River girls, or was he able to hook up with one of girls from maybe the greater Niagara Falls region?
Playing like a little peekaboo action?
That would be a good question too. Like, peekaboo was around. I'm wondering.
Do you ever go down that street? All right, so Jaquet wanted to know if you were a virgin in high school.
I want to know if Jaquet was a virgin in high school. I was close to being a virgin in high school, but not quite. So anyway, that's pretty much my final answer. There were a couple interludes, but I wasn't incredibly sexually active until I was in college. Okay.
So there was no going down peekaboo streets?
She was pretty frightening, to be honest. So, no.
All right. Well, Kent, that is going to do it for part 1 of this podcast. I am going to harass you over the next week to get a part 2, and we're going to do it, and it's going to be awesome. And I want to thank you for your time, man. Your career has been an inspiration to every single person that's listening right now, and we can't wait to talk about it more.
Thank you very much, Mr. Powell.
So that was the first hour with Kent Kreitler, and it's so awesome to listen to Kent share his history of the sport, and we're only at the beginning of it. There's so much more of Kent's story to tell you, but you and I are going to have to wait until next week for that, because I haven't recorded part 2 yet. Until then, I want you to review me on iTunes. I believe it helps the show grow, and even if it doesn't, I really like reading the reviews, even the bad ones. And if I read your review on the show as the review of the week, I'm going to send you a Powell Movement beanie. And this week's review of the week comes from Jakey Poo. It's a 5-star review titled The Best. Here it is. I love this show. Although I'm primarily free ski focused, I love all the guests from all sports and professions. Shout out to you, Mike, for bringing up the questions about money and contracts in the late 2000s. I love hearing about the glory days from guests like TJ, Tanner, and Simon, and all the other superstars of that era. I don't think we will ever see money pumped into action sports like that again. Thanks, Mike. Well, thank you for that review, and to be honest, I don't know if we'll see money pumped into action sports like that again either. It is crazy what has happened to a ton of these athletes as no one is making what the guys used to make. And I will say I appreciate the fact that you like my questions about money and contracts, because there are a lot of listeners that think it's very tacky of me to ask these questions. But you know what? I ask them because there's no other place to get this information, and this podcast seems to be the place to do it. You don't find contract questions in magazine interviews or anything like that. At least I haven't noticed them over my lifetime of reading magazines. But now that there are podcasts, we can get a little bit more personal. The interviews get a little bit deeper, and you can learn a lot more about these athletes. So that's what I love about this medium, is getting more than you can get in print. And I thank you for that review, Jakey Poo. All you need to do is reach out to me at mike@thepowellmovement.com and send me your address. I will send you a Powell Movement beanie, and I want to thank you for doing that. If anyone else would like to get in on this game of making me feel good with your words, here is what you need to do to submit a review. First, click the podcast icon on your smartphone. Second, search for the Powell Movement. Third, click my logo. Fourth, scroll down to where you see the stars. Fifth, hit however many stars you think I deserve, and then write your review. It takes about a minute. Thank you for doing it. Thank you for listening. And finally, I want to thank my sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, the 10 Barrel Brewery, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and Elan Skis. Have a great week, everyone.